in
That's
20.
where nation states are at, 7 minutes to 2 minutes now.
They went from 7 minutes in terms of the fastest we observed to 2 minutes and 7 seconds. That's wild, right?
Mm.
And what school is prepared? Now, I'm not necessarily saying a nation state is targeting you, but you got to protect against all adversaries, right?
Yeah. This is DOF Creation Service Driven University. I'm Saeed Gordon. Here we discuss all things technology, focusing on leadership, policy, and practice, and the different ways that technologies continue to evolve to address the innovative and sometimes complex challenges that we're facing within this IT space. We appreciate you joining us here today and hope you enjoy. Everyone,
Thank you.
thank you for joining us for another episode of Service Driven University. We have Shomari Smith with CrowdStrike here with us today. The topic of our conversation is going to be identity security as a unique aspect of the cybersecurity um, approach to protecting yourself. So one of the reasons why we're doing this today is that Shamar and I are working with a couple of school districts that are trying to improve security for themselves and for their district. And we're specifically looking at some of the identity protection components that can help to alert or identify threats as they're emerging. And one of the reasons why this is so important is because identity or compromised login credentials is the most common way for people to be breached, whether it's on an individual basis or a corporate basis. The old school idea of, somebody tapping away on a keyboard until they brute force their way in is really, really uncommon. It's seen more frequently, I guess, for maybe a research institution, Shamari, or for some type of large federal entity or something like that. But generally speaking, the majority of us are trying to protect ourselves from some type of login credential compromise or some type of identity compromise. So our conversation today is going to be about some of the things that we're seeing in that space, some of the things that Shamari and his team have been working on, and what CrowdStrike is doing to help to improve in that area, and also generally what things we can do to all be a bit safer. So Shamari, if you don't mind introducing yourself to the Service Driven University crowd.
Absolutely. I appreciate that introduction, Saeed, and thank you for being a trusted partner with CrowdStrike. Yeah, I've been with CrowdStrike for a little over 2 years. My background is in cybersecurity as well as traditional networking. I've been in sales, IT sales for probably 15, 16 years now. So I feel like an old dog already, but I'm not that old yet. So I still got some life in me. And
Okay.
I cover and partner with accounts in the state of Florida and specifically schools. K-12 as well as higher ed education in Florida.
Okay.
So,
Well, Shamari, of course, we're working mostly with school districts at this time,
mhm.
but identity and compromised login credentials is I mean, it's generally anybody that has access to the internet and does anything online has to be concerned about that. So when we're
Absolutely.
talking about user identities, login credentials, is there kind of a general way to understand what that means and what are some of the situations where we are exposing ourselves?
Absolutely. So, right, identity is the core of a digital footprint.
Mhm.
And so we engage with a lot of digital devices in our daily lives, whether it be logging in to do shopping, the advent and explosion of social media, utilizing things like credit cards, for example, has a lot of links to your identity. Everyone's got a social security number,
Mhm.
and digital footprint grows exponentially day by day. And so adversaries, we call bad guys adversaries here at CrowdStrike, um, lean in on that information, right? Data is the new oil, as you've probably heard time and time again over the last decade. And the value of data continually increases as more and more of that digital footprint grows with the digital services that you use on a day-to-day basis. And those things blur between your personal life as well as your work life. So a lot of breaches that are occurring and adversarial tactics can focus and stem from breaches that happen outside of the workspace. In terms of accounts and credentials you may use elsewhere for things like shopping at Target or Amazon, or logins you've created for other purposes entirely outside of work. But
Mhm.
the rise of things like data brokers, which are basically dark web markets and people that collect and compile and clean and sanitize and look through and post these large amounts of data for sale, allow adversaries to move faster. And everything that they do is in service of trying to move faster, to gain actionable insight, to gain entry unlawfully, but to gain entry into organizations in order to either extrapolate or exfiltrate data and or hold things hostage or for ransom. And
Mm.
so CrowdStrike has focused on this space for quite some time now. I want to say 4 to 5 years in terms of what we're trying to do to stay ahead of the adversary and stay faster. So identity is where it's at, fortunately
Mm.
and unfortunately, for today's adversaries.
So we often look at, as you talk about data as the new oil, we're kind of the old school approach. People talk about the onion and the M&M and your data is at the center. And of course, the M&M is kind of, the oldest approach to it, just put a very thin layer of security around your data and hope, fingers crossed, nothing happens. But when we're looking at the onion, where, data is kind of like that layer right at the center as you start peeling back layer after layer after layer of the onion, can you see identity as maybe being multiple layers of that onion, or is identity one thing within your security posture, or are there multiple layers that are impacted by identity across your entire security landscape?
It's a very good question, Saeed. And I would actually argue that identity plays a role at each layer of the onion. And that's because an organization will have many different types of applications, services, hardware, software to help operate their business. Some are entirely virtual and some are more legacy in terms of operation. But as we
Mhm.
move to a more digitized, automated world and infusing data and technology components into every aspect of the business, things like identity continually show up as key gating components of getting access to things, right? And
Mhm.
it's all about access, right? So
Yeah.
you have login credentials for things like a perimeter security device, like a firewall, or
Mhm.
internal network, like a switch, or server infrastructure that hosts applications or stores data. You'll have identity credentials now for the burgeoning cloud landscape. There's a lot of adoption happening in K-12 and migration or the shift up, shift left to move legacy infrastructure and servers into the cloud, leveraging the services and advanced capabilities of cloud partners like AWS, GCP, and Microsoft.
Mhm.
So I would say and argue that identity is critical because it touches at every different juncture. There are core key components at the center of every organization, every education organization that kind of manage identity infrastructure. Most K-12s are on Microsoft Entra, for example, or Active Directory if you want to use legacy terminology. And that kind of acts as a gatekeeper, for better or worse, to get to all these different resources, right? It is the traffic cop, so to speak, of are you who you say you are? You have the same username and login password as Michael or Christian or Jamie.
Mhm.
And so, based on that profile, you have certain attributes that gives you access to various areas of this environment and the tools and
Mhm.
resources therein. And it allows you to go certain places. So, putting proper safeguards at every level of that onion and having a defense in depth approach. And identity is not the end all be all.
Mhm.
You still need things like perimeter security. You still need things like zero trust architecture um, to provide a proper defense in depth strategy. But what we're seeing in the adversarial space is much more attention over the past few years to figuring out how to walk in, to the house, to the front door with keys, as opposed to breaking a window or lifting a floorboard, so to speak.
Yeah, and those keys are obviously, our individual login credentials, whether that's like you said, your target information that is then being used to get into your company information because you're using the same company email at
Mhm.
logging into your target account or something like that.
Hopefully,
Um,
people aren't doing that, but that's true. And it's not always people, it's not always actual human users.
mhm,
Organizations, K-12s have service accounts, and they utilize
okay.
the service accounts in various different ways to create access, for example, for contractors or other vendors that co-manage certain software or hardware in the environment, or those service accounts are utilized in different functions. But it's
Mhm.
always challenging to keep an eye on everything, especially as people join the business, people leave the business, and making sure that hygiene is in place has become increasingly critical.
Yeah. Is there, when you look at the value of a login credential, and you discussed this previously, but that credential is used in different ways or at different points or places within someone's infrastructure, within someone's current security landscape. Is there a greater concern you have over certain credentials or certain users at certain stages, or is it kind of a blanket view that you have of, for the concern I have is equal regardless of who the user is and what access the user may have to any particular resources or data?
Mhm. Good question, Said. So not every credential has the same level of permissions in an organization.
Hmm.
People in IT infrastructure or higher ups that manage the security of the environment, the integrity of the environment, and the stability of the environment usually have higher levels of credential access. So their username and password combination will give them administrative access to certain areas of the environment.
Hmm.
Whereas a teacher might not necessarily have that. They might have administrative access to teaching software, or people in finance department would have administrative access to payroll software.
Hmm.
So it really depends, right, on the type of tools that those keys were made for and who's accessing them. However, it is definitely a very valid argument that even the weakest link in the chain link fence is what ultimately can spiral into elevated access for an adversary, spiral into them getting into different areas, and they're getting more and more crafty. So we see things where even a student account can get compromised, and the expectation on the outside at face value is that student accounts shouldn't have much access to anything besides the lowest level functions, the key software they're using for their student applications in order to learn.
Hmm.
But we've seen in more than one situation where we do incident response that a student account gets compromised and an adversary leveraging different kinds of tradecraft, maybe certain tools to live off the land, utilizing software that's currently in the environment in a malicious way. So they're not necessarily dropping malware. I think it's something
Hmm.
like 75% of today's intrusions are malware free. So utilizing tools that are already in the environment in a malicious way to do reconnaissance, to get an understanding, a lay of the land, and then moving laterally in the environment, going from host to host or area of domain to different area of domain, and then elevating their privileges along the way until they can find that administrative account, that service account that might be accidentally over provisioned, that
Hmm.
person who left the organization, but their credentials weren't properly wiped from the environment. And once they get up there, that's keys to the castle. That gives them carte blanche access to do what they want in the environment. And that's usually data exfiltration, encryption, ransomware.
Gotcha. With the all of this has made all these changes are about efficiency, right? Like our goal from a technology perspective is to try to be more efficient. When we talk about the different things that, say, CrowdStrike as a partner is doing to improve security resources available to customers, it's about efficiency, the ability for you to respond quicker, to identify threats quicker. Hopefully, being faster and more efficient allows you to stay safer. What is the big element of focusing on identity credentials for bad actors or adversaries? How has that made them more efficient as, I guess, as hackers?
Absolutely. So in CrowdStrike, we have a term that we utilize when we talk to schools about understanding the speed of the adversarial landscape now. We do a lot of incident response. The company actually started in 2011 as an incident response and intelligence company, even before we did stuff like EDR.
Mhm.
And so threat intelligence is critical to essentially who we are and how we try to stay ahead of the bad guys. And what we track is something called breakout time. Breakout time simply means the amount of time it takes from initial intrusion to moving laterally to another host in the environment. So they've already gotten initial entry, they've established themselves, and now they're starting to do things like understanding the environment, get a lay of the land.
Mhm.
And over years past, that average or median breakout time used to be measured in hour and a half or longer, and that number has creeped down precipitously each and every year as tradecraft has advanced on the adversarial side. I think it was 2 years ago, we were at 84 minutes in median breakout time, meaning from initial compromise on one host to moving laterally in an environment. It went down to 72 minutes, I believe, 2 years ago. And I think we're at either 64 or 62 minutes now. For some reason, I'm blanking on specifically what it is. But the fastest time that we observed from a advanced adversary, now in this case, it's a nation state. Usually it's a nation state because they have the most resources and capabilities and some of the most seasoned black hat professionals on their staff, went
Mhm.
from 7 minutes 2 years ago to 2 minutes and 7 seconds in
That's
20.
where nation states are at, 7 minutes to 2 minutes now.
They went from 7 minutes in terms of the fastest we observed to 2 minutes and 7 seconds. That's wild, right?
Mm.
And what school is prepared? Now, I'm not necessarily saying a nation state is targeting you, but you got to protect against all adversaries, right?
Yeah, just in
Right.
case.
This is probably a little bit more important for things like public utilities, critical infrastructure, government, right?
Mhm.
But the fact that these guys can go from 7 minutes to 2 minutes and 7 seconds, and now we're at this cresting wave of generational AI and deep
Mhm.
fakes and advanced social engineering, um, that you saw at places like the casino. Why am I blanking? MGM, sorry.
Yes.
MGM and Caesars last summer, right? Bad guy called in impersonating, and they utilized publicly available information. They did
Mhm.
research. They did their research on employees. They looked for someone that was likely to have administrative access to a couple of different places. They impersonated that person to the help desk. The help desk, most people don't realize this, but a lot of help desks have metrics that they have to meet. And one of those key metrics is how fast they resolve a case, right?
Mhm.
So they are incentivized to figure out how quickly they can resolve a customer's case, an internal customer's case. And once they realize, oh, all I have to do is do a password reset, cool, case closed in 2 minutes. But they leverage that against them. Help desk thought they were refreshing a password, resetting a password for an employee, but it was in fact for a bad actor. Bad actor gained initial access through social engineering. No CVEs exploited, at least an
Mhm.
initial compromise, right? No hacking like we see in movies like Swordfish was done. They fooled a person. They fooled a person. And
Yeah.
so that's happening more and more and more often. Is going after the weakest link, which are people in some cases. We see advanced phishing emails that look almost exactly like legitimate ones to fool you into clicking on
Hmm.
something or to opening something in order to allow them access. But these guys got in, they did some bad stuff. They encrypted a really large part of the environment. They exfiltrated data. Caesars paid, and you didn't really see them in the news when it happened. MGM
Hmm.
not. You saw them in the news, and then it came out about Caesars after the fact. But
Yeah.
it really hurt the business. And for schools, I'm not necessarily saying that an advanced APT or adversary with the capability of the ones who did Scattered Spider, Punk Spider, the ones who did MGM is going to focus on you and your environment. The tools, the capabilities, the know-how, all of that stuff trickles down in the dark web too. So other e-crime adversaries will leverage the same tactics to fool your employees or to simply purchase compromised credentials off the dark web and walk in and masquerade as Janine in accounting, or masquerade as Jim, who's a teacher,
Hmm.
or Pauline, who's on the IT team and has elevated privileges already. Then it's a matter of having the visibility to say, hey, Pauline doesn't normally log in from that place, or Pauline doesn't normally log in at that time, or Pauline doesn't usually access those systems in that way, or those parts of the environment in that way. And being able to have tools, capability, automation built in to respond as quickly as possible before they have an opportunity to go in and start deploying malware of some sort after doing reconnaissance, getting an understanding of the environment, and starting to do bad stuff.
Well, you mentioned the advanced phishing, the ways that bad actors are kind of teaching other, I guess, hacking colleagues or the next generation of hacker. Um, and when you look at all the different things that are out there, we touched on AI and the way that AI is shaping and changing things. I mean, it's almost like hackers are taking the measure twice, cut once method, to heart and applying it to hacking. When you're,
So,
when you're doing a DIY project, measure twice, check to make sure that 2x4 is the length you need to be, and then cut once. If you're sitting there thinking about kind of what phishing can be used for, where we're specifically targeting these individuals, we're coming up with our strategy, like you said, not clicking away on the keyboard like Hugh Jackman. You're sitting there and trying to come up with your effectively your pitch to get in the door and increase your odds of having success. And it also is lower stress as well. Like that time that you're spending trying to brute force your way in, it's a lot easier to just be on the phone or send out emails to people.
mhm.
Um, and I think that's one of those things that comes up commonly when we talk about protecting ourselves is that bad actors only need you to make one mistake, but you
Yep,
have to be perfect all the time, right?
correct.
You can be 99% good when it comes to your cyber hygiene, catching the phishing email, asking all the important questions when someone calls you with some type of scam. But if you just have a rough day or you're a little bit sleepy, you didn't get your full 8 hours, that can be it.
And it's not just about being perfect, right? We all
Hmm.
recognize that no one's perfect, and anyone who admits to or makes the claim that they are is lying to themselves, and everybody else
Yeah.
knows it. But we've seen a commoditization of things like ransomware. You now have RAS, ransomware as a service.
Yep.
So you have folks who don't have to do as much, nearly as much work to implement a campaign to go after a certain business or businesses or subset or vertical or what have you, education, for example, and they can simply buy a whole suite of tools to employ that campaign instead of having to come up with the coding themselves or putting the pieces together themselves. It's pre-built. They
Yeah.
can also go on the dark web to a data broker and buy credentials, right? So we have these breaches happening in the commercial sector, banks, Healthcare institutions have made major waves like Change Healthcare in the recent past, excuse me, Ascension. That information gets out there. And then the first thing these bad guys do, these data brokers, they'll collect that information, they'll scrape it, they'll clean it, and they'll look at it, and they'll go and test like a velociraptor on the fence in Jurassic Park. They'll go and test at other banks, at other K-12 institutions, at other types of businesses to see if those credentials are used anywhere else. And that's why you've seen a lot of folks in the space say utilize as an individual, not just as the education institution, but as the individual, utilize your own defense in depth strategy anywhere you see
Hmm.
things like that accept MFA and not the old fashioned kind of MFA where you get a text message sent to you because text messages have been compromised for years too,
Yeah.
technically. But use rolling key MFA. Um, so it's not just something you know, it's also something you have in the environment. And that defense in depth strategy will allow you to be not as slow as the slowest person running away from the bear. So to
Yeah. Yeah. The the data brokers, how have data brokers, I guess, is the availability of data on the dark web because of data brokers and because of all the previous compromises and data leaks or data breaches, has that also played a part in making identity a much more appealing or interesting area for bad actors to target?
it's part of the reason. Absolutely. The growth in data brokers that CrowdStrike has seen over the last few years, and it's a big explosion, um, well over 100% over the last few years.
Oh
We've
wow, okay.
seen that data brokers simplify some of the hard legwork, initial legwork of trying to figure out how to compromise an environment. And that's because organizations, education institutions are made up of people, hundreds of people in some, or thousands of people in some school districts around the state and around the country. And
Mhm.
so the odds of one person possibly utilizing the same email and password somewhere outside of the business is actually relatively high.
Mhm.
And so it's important to obviously during hygiene, during education processes for maintaining integrity and security, teach employees, right? Things like social engineering pitfalls and phishing emails and what they look like and stuff like that, but also remind them do not use your credentials for this school district anywhere else, right?
Mhm.
Because if you do, data brokers make it easy for adversaries to collect that information and then utilize it elsewhere at the place you work as opposed to the place you buy or the place you read news or the place you go pick up your medicine. And so that stuff is compiled and easily available for relatively cheap on the dark web. You'll periodically see if you read the security trade rags like Bleeping Computer or Hacker News or things like that,
Mhm.
that data brokers and the FBI or multinational government efforts are going after data broker institutions. Like one of the most recent ones I think I read about was Lockbit. Lockbit's pretty famous or infamous.
Mhm.
They're responsible for breaching or having a hand in breaching thousands upon thousands of companies, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of their reign in the adversarial space. And they essentially are a ransomware broker and data broker in that they created a marketplace, just like a regular business. They created a
Yeah.
marketplace for adversarial groups to come to gain information, to buy access. Some of these guys will focus entirely on initial access and then they'll stop and they'll sell it to somebody else who wants to go and try to do more damage or exfiltrate data. And so they'll keep that stuff like keys on the keychain and utilize it because there's more than one way to make money in this space, unfortunately. And the goal is to not just stop the breach, because you always have to prepare for after a breach as well, right? That's why you see companies have grown in popularity and size that focus on things like data resilience and being able to come back up, like Rubric, and Cohesity, and building data immutability to protect the data beyond the breach, because you have to plan for when, not if, a lot now, as opposed to just trying to stop everyone from getting in. That shouldn't be. Someone's going to make a mistake sooner or later. And how you guys respond, how the education institution or whomever responds to that is just as important as the tools that they have in place to
Mhm.
see, to understand, and to act as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. As you mentioned the employees using company credentials outside of the company as a bad day-to-day practice or poor example of I guess maybe a lack of cyber hygiene. Is there another example or maybe two examples that you've seen that have been most common or most concerning from your perspective around how people are using their credentials or not protecting their credentials?
So MFA everywhere that you
Okay.
can is definitely one of the things I would strongly recommend as a
Hmm.
day-to-day user. Um, and don't use the same credentials for work as you do in your personal life. Um,
Hmm.
Utilizing password managers is also something that you guys that people can do on a regular basis. And I believe there's not just third-party offerings like 1Password, Bitwarden that are out there, but there are native tools built into the software of everyone's phone who has a smartphone nowadays, right? So if you have an iPhone or an Android phone, I believe there are native password managers that are built into the OS level, that you can use to automatically create long, complex passwords or passphrases that you don't necessarily have to remember. All you have to remember is one, a master password, and you make it really long and complex. And what something you can do is simply just build a random sentence and then insert a couple of special characters. So um, password managers will make it look like gobbledygook, but
Hmm.
you can also have a password that says Saeed jumps over the brown dog, long fox 44, and then have a couple special characters in there, right? And as long as you
Yeah.
hit certain levels of entropy, meaning certain levels of length and complexity, however long it takes for a brute force to figure out that specific combination of uh, letters or characters, grows exponentially to the point where it becomes time and cost prohibitive for an
Hmm.
adversary to try to break that password, right? And it's as much about stopping the breach, but it's also about creating as much friction and making it as costly as possible for your organization to become compromised along the way, right?
Hmm.
Um, Putting safeguards in place to accelerate time to understanding and action, but also making sure that you don't make yourself the ripest target. Someone's going to make a mistake. It does happen. You also have things like insider threats, right? You have
Hmm.
a angry employee for whatever reason leave unceremoniously and leave a back door open or sell their credentials or drop some sort of IT related bomb as they leave. And
Yeah.
that could cause damage as well. So you have to be able to see those types of things in as close to real time as possible. And identity has been involved or been at the focal or the core of almost every major breach in the last 12 to 18 months, which is why I like to bang the drum about it down here in Florida.
Well, I guess to that point, that kind of leads us into what is CrowdStrike doing specifically around identity? Obviously, with us at DOF, there are a lot of things you guys are doing that we're fans of and that we think our customers can benefit from. But what are the things that you at CrowdStrike are doing that you think is going to be most impactful or that you're most proud of as it pertains to identity defense and security?
Well, first, it's also recognizing the problem that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think CrowdStrike, because of the focus and the size of the threat intelligence apparatus that we have, it allows
Mm-hmm.
us to understand better than some of our competition, um, behaviors of the adversary, the types of things that they're doing, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that they are utilizing to gain unlawful or malicious entry into an environment without the customer or the organization understanding what's going on. And
Mm-hmm.
so what we've seen is this transition. I'm not saying CVEs are going away anytime soon, right? You still got to patch your stuff, and everybody loves
Yeah.
Patch Tuesday. That was a joke. Um, but you have to have really, really good visibility. And so there are a couple of different solution sets in the identity space, and it's important to kind of understand the differences between them. Like you may be familiar with things like an IAM, Identity Access Management, or PAM, Privileged Access Management. And
Mm-hmm.
while those tools are important to getting a hold and an understanding and control of the identity space in your environment, ITDR, which is what we do, identity threat detection and response, is increasingly critical to helping stop the breach. And so IAM and privileged access management, or PAM, are important to trying to reduce the footprint of potentially compromised assets, have a good understanding for things like change management of who people are and if they are who they say they are in an environment, right? For compliance reasons, for um, hygiene reasons, it's important to look at those type of solutions, especially if the organization's on the larger side.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've been doing over the last several years at the endpoint, which is EDR, and it's now transitioned into XDR, or extended detection and response, that's what we're really focusing on the identity side, whether that be in
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft Entra, in hybrid environments, or legacy environments that just have domain controllers. And that's becoming a true flight controller or flight recorder and traffic cop at the DC, right? All authentication traffic will pass and traverse through Entra in the vast majority of schools, or on-prem and AD. And being able to sit right at that nexus point, see all authentication traffic as it traverses a domain, and then make understandable insights based on baselining of all accounts in the environment, which is what we focus on doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see anomalous behavior as it happens. So the traditional Superman type attack where Saeed logs in traditionally 99% of the time from Tampa, Florida, and then suddenly at 3 a.m. on Sunday, he's logging in from Seattle, Washington, or Kuala Lumpur, or Beijing. That's not normal. That we're going
Mm-hmm.
to flag that. And you might have safeguards at the perimeter to do that, where you have geo blocking on firewalls or something along those lines. But it could be that you are trying to access an area of the environment that is important in nature, but you don't follow the normal prescribed path of utilizing a jump box to RDP. And I might be using some technical jargon, so forgive me if it's flying a little bit over the head, but you might be utilizing a non-traditional path to get to that endpoint or that part of the environment. An IAM or a PAM is not necessarily going to catch that. You have the right credentials, right? But you use them in an unusual way. And so ITDR, similar to EDR at the endpoint, looks for that anomalous behavior. Is the user utilizing the credentials in a non-traditional way, in an abnormal way, to circumvent protections in place? Or are they just doing something that they don't normally do? In which case, it should raise a flag, because that is the genesis of how a lot of breaches occur, or how
Mm-hmm.
they escalate along the way after initial point of compromise. And so CrowdStrike marries the ITDR, identity threat detection and response, with that robust industry leading threat intelligence aspect to stay ahead of the adversary, and by truly knowing their habits and breaking them before it becomes a broad scale breach, they have the keys to the kingdom and they're going and doing bad stuff and exfiltrating data, making everybody's life a pain along the way.
Yeah. So with we talked about efficiency earlier. How does this, you talked about that process of being able to determine if somebody's activities are either suspicious or at the very least abnormal and being able to send that alert off, being able to use that as a flag. How efficient can this make an IT department, a security team, or a security professional? And that crazy number you gave of 7 minutes down to 2 minutes and slowly chipping away from an hour and a half down to an hour, how does this help a customer to kind of match the speed that bad actors are able to get in and then start moving and searching?
Well, let's face it, Saeed, no school is going to necessarily have the ability to hire enough people to work 24/7, 365 on holidays, on weekends, across New Year's, while on vacation to keep an eye on this stuff, right? So you
Mhm.
have to be able to leverage important tools to gain that visibility, actionable insight, and to be able to automate remediation to a certain extent. And the nice thing is with our identity threat detection and response, and probably some of our competitors as well, we have integration of a SOAR, which allows for automating response actions, whether that be notifying specific people within the organization, whether it be blocking off access or putting a user credential or an account on a watch group. Also giving visibility to the service accounts that sometimes get orphaned and sit out there on the island of invisibility in a organization's environment. And so it allows us to move as fast as the adversary, combine that actionable insight that we have from our deep threat intelligence to understand adversarial behavior and the bad things that they do, and automate a large swath of the remediation or action process on behalf of the school, on behalf of the organization. And so it allows them to move as quickly as possible through things and use of things like playbooks to automate that process, a large part of that process, while putting those users on a watch list, while maybe reducing credentials, while maybe creating ugh, granular conditional access controls in place. So if Saeed doesn't follow the normal path to get to that asset in your VDI environment, force MFA an extra time, force MFA every time. Or if he
Mhm.
shouldn't probably be there in the first place, just block him, right?
Yeah.
That's automatic. So that closes a really big door in the environment for a lot of K-12s where you've seen policy and oversight and insurance that work with schools start to increase requirements over the years to say, well, you need to have EDR on every endpoint now. That's critical for us to ensure you.
Yeah.
Now you need to have MFA put everywhere. That's critical for us to ensure you, or you've become a really big risk to us and your premiums are going to go through the roof. Identity is the next thing. It's already starting to happen in certain places. And so you'll see insurers and underwriters start to preach, what do you have in place to organize, to keep track of all those credentials and those keys to the kingdom? Because what we've seen from the payouts we've had to do in the past is, oh, you did a good job patching stuff. But the bad guys just walked in, excuse me, the bad guys just walked in the back door and you didn't see them for 13 days and they exfiltrated your data. And the only time you realized it was when you got the pop-up screen with the skull and the crossbones or whatever
Yeah.
bad stuff that they do in order to get into the environment. Or someone clicked an email they shouldn't have clicked on and they got fooled. Or Peggy in accounting who talks with Donna, a third party payroll processor, didn't realize she wasn't talking to Donna and she was talking to an adversarial group because Donna's company got hacked, right?
Hmm.
Supply chain breach. And now you're talking to a malicious adversary who is impersonating somebody you trust and know,
Hmm.
which goes back to the whole Gen AI thing and how social engineering is getting much more complex with deep fakes and voice copiers and digital representations looking just like the real thing. Um, and they get in through that door. So ITDR is increasingly critical, a critical component of a security stack to prevent the breach from happening and to respond to initial compromise as expeditiously as possible.
Okay. And you mentioned the payouts. I guess you guys are doing or part of that payout process through your incident response teams.
Can you rephrase that? I'm not sure exactly.
I think you might have misspoken, but you said the payouts you've done, but that's you guys are part of like the incident
No,
response, the
we
remediation investigation.
so we do IR, right? That's one
Okay.
of the core pillars of what CrowdStrike does. We are one of the largest in the world in terms of incident response. We've been involved with very public breaches to
Hmm.
help with cleanup process. While we are not the actual insurer, we might be
Hmm.
involved in that chain downstream, and we have strong relationships with a lot of the major insurance companies that provide insurance to K-12s and higher eds and education as a whole, as well as the
Hmm.
underwriters. And the one thing I can say, which is pretty cool, is not only do we offer a breach warranty for our managed services offering, which is a layer of services on top of the technology, where we kind of operate soup to nuts, white glove things for our customers and handle day to day, as well as the 24 by 7 threat hunting and the remediation as well. But when insurers see that the customer has managed services from CrowdStrike, it actually has shown to decrease the risk of premium increase, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
we've seen where premiums will hold steady for a customer or even decrease because they're partnering strategically with CrowdStrike managed services.
All right. Well, I appreciate that you mentioned the cyber insurance component because we talk about cyber insurance a lot. And from, with my background with the law, I often I often don't expect much from a policy perspective as it pertains to federal or state policymaking, because very often either the policymakers are going to catch things 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road,
No,
or
what are you
they don't
talking about?
have,
They're always on top of it.
or they don't have maybe enough technical experience to understand what their policies are doing. We'll see that a lot. We work in Tennessee. The state of Tennessee had a variety of policies come down from the state level, and the amount of additional effort required on the part of school districts to try to get in compliance, and most failed to be in compliance, but the effort to just try to be in compliance was so massive, and the reward to the school districts in that process was not what was intended. So when I see what cyber insurance is doing, and cyber insurance is really that's the policy making arm across the country as it pertains to cybersecurity and improving cybersecurity posture for most organizations. Because cyber insurance is both involved in technology, involved in cybersecurity specifically, and they're also invested in it because it's their money on the line. So
Very
I love
true.
seeing the way that cyber insurance is helping to push large entities, not even large entities, most entities, because most entities are insured now, but most entities in a positive direction. Obviously, the price of cyber insurance now is not a positive thing. It's very,
No.
very, very challenging for most people who have insurance. But I love seeing how cyber insurance is kind of guiding organizations and also giving, we speak to a lot of IT leaders. Sometimes that's the thing that allows them to get the resources or the change they need, getting buy-in for MFA, buy-in for
Mhm.
more phishing training, buy-in for improvements to policies or enforcement of policies that maybe people were ignoring. A lot of times it's the cyber insurance, it's the it's both a carrot and a very, very big stick for a lot
I
of
was
IT leaders,
I
you
was
know, be
just
able to
about to
leverage
say
that.
that. I was just
Yeah.
about to say that. But it's all for IT leaders, it's right. Like what pieces in place do I have to put to mitigate the most risk?
Yes.
Right? And that risk can
Yes.
come in several different forms. It can be in terms of the technologies we use, it can be in terms of the policies and procedures we employ to make sure
Hmm.
our employees are ready to respond, as well as keeping up with day-to-day maintenance. It is hiring the right people for the organization and trying to also train and promote from within. It is it is a multifaceted, never-ending process to keep all of these plates spinning in the air. And it's also the IT leader's job, in most respects, in a K-12 organization to be able to translate, be the arbiter of these policies, procedures, technologies, components, people, processes, and all these other different aspects to other leaders within the organization, whether that be the board, the provost, the superintendent, you name it, the financial controller, the CFO, etc. Right?
Hmm.
IT is the bedrock and part of the foundation of every child's digital learning experience. Kids
Hmm.
all, especially after the pandemic, right? That created a bomb rush of adoption of technology, and kids are learning digitally more than ever, and that will continue to grow over
Hmm.
time. There's a lot of SaaS applications that are being leveraged now in the classroom. There media such as tools like YouTube is being leveraged in the classroom more and more. Um, and all of these digital components create pockets of risk. And so, as the IT director or the CIO or CISO in certain organizations, if they're large enough, they're balancing all of these different areas to minimize potential risk to the organization. Because if a ransomware event happens or a breach happens, kids don't learn.
Hmm.
And that's the ultimate problem that needs to be protected against. We need to make sure our kids stay in school. We need to make sure that our teachers are empowered to do the jobs that they love and support those students in their journey to become future leaders. And it's CrowdStrike's mission to be a strong part of that foundational aspect to enable those teams that are usually relatively lean to stay up to or ahead of these advancing adversaries.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up our conversation today. Um, again, this is another session in Service Driven University. We appreciate Shomari for being here on behalf of CrowdStrike. And our goal, especially when we talk about security, a lot of things are scary. A lot of things are, I guess feel like shock and awe. The goal is never to, just make somebody concerned or afraid. There's enough of that when you, like, as Shomari said, talking about MGM or anything else that's in the news. The goal is to try to provide a couple of takeaways, a couple of options, a couple of solutions that can help us all to be a little bit safer and hopefully to feel a little bit safer and more comfortable in what we're doing. So as Shamari highlighted multiple times, making sure that we are not using company login credentials for personal purposes, creating additional risk of exposure, and just making sure that we're aware of what it is we're doing with our credentials, who has access to what, and especially from a corporate perspective, making sure that we're tracking all of those credentials, which credentials are out of use, which credentials should be out of use, or maybe need to have higher levels of security, different multi-factor solutions and strategies placed on top of that. So again, Shamari, we appreciate your insights. We appreciate your advice and your guidance here. We're going to have Shamari's information available with these with the videos when they're made available. And if you ever want to get in touch with me at DOF, feel free. It's Saeed Gordon or SB Gordon at dofcreations.com. And Shamari, if you want to give everyone your email, we'll also make that
Sure.
available to everyone as well.
Absolutely. It's Shomari. Everybody spell that real quick. No, I'm just kidding. It's Shomari dot Smith. Smith's a little easier. Shomari dot Smith at crowdstrike.com.
All
Appreciate
right.
the time and thanks for having me on.
Definitely, Shamar. We'll be doing this again. And as I said before, this is Saeed with DOF Creations and Service Driven University. We appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Thank you.